Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. We're running a few minutes late, so I'd like everybody to take a seat so we can get started. First of all, on behalf of the KPAA, I would like to welcome both candidates. Jim is here now, Chris will be coming shortly, and thank them for attending this forum. I would also like to thank the Killington Deli and Marketplace for providing the coffee and the breakfast. Thank you very much. The purpose of this forum is to ask the candidates questions that directly impact the KPAA, its members, and the greater business community. Each candidate will be given a 10-minute timed opening statement, followed by 4 questions that they were provided in advance. These questions are printed out, and if you would like a copy to follow along, please see Amy or Abby. And then the town report is also here if you want to refer to that on any of these items. After that, we will open up the floor to questions from the business community. If you have a question when called, please state your name, your business, and then your question. I just want to be clear that this forum is not meant to be a debate, but a chance for the candidates to answer questions on issues that affect the business community. With that, I will turn it over to Jim when he's ready. When he starts, I will start the timer for 10 minutes, and at the end of that 10 minutes, we'll start with the questions. Thank you all again. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And let me know when you're ready. And we're ready.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here, folks. A lot of the questions that I've looked at for the 4 questions that you're giving to me, I think a lot of the answers are going to be right here in my own presentation. So we have the first slide here. It's just a presentation. No, stop the clock. Okay. So now I've learned how to do it. So the town. So basically, my whole issue of running for the selectmen is the town budgeting and accounting practices, and there are 3 specifics: the year-end balances in the general fund, the restricted funds and sinking funds, and the Vermont education payment due in June. All of these can be found in your town book that you were just given through pages 8 to 10 that was mailed out to you. It's not, I haven't given you, this is your town report given to you from the town, not from me. None of this stuff is from me. So my question 1 to the town is, how does this administration arrive at a cash surplus, which you'll see that they're trying to tell us there's $243,000 plus money of a surplus from the previous year, when the restricted funds are underfunded and existing restricted funds, including the state education fund balances, are being used for cash flow. So my opponent's statement back on a January 20th select board meeting, and if I pulled this up from PEG TV, it's the 37th minute and the 32nd. That's where it starts. And he's basically talking about the fire capital, and he was wishing that we could put the full 2.3% increase in, because the cash is still in the town's cash flow. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you're spending the money this year, but it does help the town's cash flow a little bit in terms of how much money we have to borrow. I don't understand how you're using restricted funds as cash flow. So I've gone to the Municipal Treasurer's Handbook, Vermont Leads of Cities and Towns, and it's page 20D, Special Funds. And you all have this in front of you, and it tells you what a reserve fund is. It basically tells you that on the 3rd sentence, the 4th sentence, 24 VSA, which I know that our board loves to follow the state statutes, or I hope they do, 2804. Reserve funds are not slush funds. Then at the bottom of the page, it basically is, once established, money in a reserve fund may be expended by the select board for its stated purpose without further voter approval. Any money not spent in here in a reserve fund annually carries over to the next year. It goes basically down at the bottom, and it's telling you still once again, it must be kept in a separate account, and the funds are subject to an annual audit of the money, 24 VSA 04. This is backed up by the Select Board Handbook from the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, which is in Chapter 16, page 153. And it's telling us basically, as a selectman, the board should act in a physically responsible manner and ensure that all the money is invested wisely until such time as it is actually needed. The voters, not the Select Board, have the authority to spend the money from the reserve funds for purposes other than the original purpose if they so vote at an annual or special meeting. It further goes on to tell you what a sinking fund is. I bring up the sinking fund, which is 24 VSA 177. So in other words, this money is allocated for money already spent. Money in a sinking fund must be used for the intended purpose. It may not be used for current operating expenses. And it's basically strictly for the retirement of a bond or other debt. My question two, where has this administration placed their restricted fund balances represented in the town report? And why is the restricted fund, when you look on that page with the restricted fund listings, number 202, which is a golf debt balloon payment, in the restricted funds when it should be a sinking fund according to the state statutes? Our town manager's statement, which was in the Mountain Times regular meeting on January 6th, was giving us that the cash flow situation is getting better. It goes on to say that at the end of this year we had $4.5 million in the bank, and we owe $4.4 million in June. And the previous year we had $4.3 million in the bank, and we owed $4.4 million in June. So he figures we're up about $200,000 on our cash flow. This is the comparison sheet that I had done. So I've taken our current administration, and I've taken the previous administration, Ramsey, Kathleen from 2009, and I'm taking Dave Lewis from 2007. What I had to do here in order to get the cash, because this current administration is using the restricted funds plus the state education funds as cash. Okay? So that's why in 2013 you're seeing $4.357 million in cash, and in 2014 $4.5 million. In the previous administrations, what they would do was, as cash, Kathleen had, and you can go back to the 2009 handbook, would show $26,472 in cash. And then she would have the state of Vermont and the restricted funds all as one. They were always counted as restricted funds in the previous administrations. In the Lewis era, in 2007, he showed a surplus of $510,942.86 in the cash value, and he once again had $5,050,000 that we collected in November for a payment in the following June as a restricted fund, and then he also had the $769,000. So if you add the $769,000 and the $5,050,000, you're going to come up with the $633,000. So what I had done here was took the cash that Lewis took these two numbers, came up with this number so we can compare apples to apples. Then I subtracted out the $5,050,000 that the state has the payment for, which is a restricted fund. And then that gave me a net cash balance of this, but then I had to take the cash restricted funds for the town of $769,000, which gave us $510,000. Same thing here, which gave Kathleen a cash balance of $26,474. For some reason in 2000, and I'm not sure when, I believe this current administration, I'm not exactly remember if it was 11 or 12, but 2013, we pulled the state education payment out of the restricted funds, and we're actually adding in what we owe to the state and what we owe into the restricted funds for our cash balance. And then we're subtracting what due to the state of Vermont, which gave us this prior year a negative balance of $113, which then we still didn't have the money for the actual restricted funds that you voted to put into and are no longer there, which gave us a deficit of $996,839.02. This is the one that you have in front of you now. Once again, they took the state education money, which is supposed to be a restricted fund, and the restricted funds, and they're asking you to count it as cash. Then they're telling you they owe $4,461,000 to the state education, which is restricted, not to be touched. Gave us a balance of $61,000, and then you have to subtract what you voted in on the town side of $972,345. So we actually have a negative cash balance in our town of close to $1 million. How do we have $243,550 of an operating surplus balance? I'm not sure. So question 3, how is this administration using state education funds to fund the town's cash flow? So in your pamphlet, I gave you the Municipal Treasurer's Handbook. It shows you the rules and regulations that the town must follow if they ever want to borrow from this fund.
We're down to 1 minute.
I know. So you can read that right there. Question 4, so how can we vote, which I already said, when a projected fund balance of $243,550 is carried over to the current budget? When you recognize on this pamphlet that I gave you, page 9, the town needs to raise $3,976,000 instead of the article stated amount of $3,732,000. If you don't have the 243, folks, that money should be into the restricted funds. So I believe we really should be concerned about the total deficit of $911,000, but I'm trying to stay within the articles you're being asked to vote. And I'm asking you to vote for me, and I'm asking you also to vote down the town budget, because it's incorrect. And basically you'll vote for Jim Heff. I have many controversial items that I've been on in the past, but I've done a lot of these things, and you can read on to it. They've all been right, folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Now we're going to propose the 4 questions that we had sent to Jim and Chris in advance. Some of them have been answered, but I'll give them an opportunity to speak more on them.
Okay, can I have a minute to pull questions up for me?
Absolutely.
Jim, we have a paper version. You want it for the questions?
Yeah, that would be great if you have it right there, Phil. No, this is the same.
Okay, so question 1, Jim. How will you work with the business community, the town employees, and the residents to build consensus on a variety of issues and ensure we grow the regional four-season economy? Why are you well suited and qualified for the aspects of this job as selectman?
Okay, so basically the last question of why do I believe I'm suited and qualified for the aspects of the job as selectman, I just gave you a whole presentation. And since day 1, folks, that I stepped into this town, I mean, everything that I have said has been right. It has been controversial at times, but it's very hard to sit there and say there's a golf course debt, and then have people tell you there's not a golf course debt. And then have years later, people say, oh wow, there was a golf course debt. Then when the option tax was voted in, I was completely against the option tax, because I don't think the town should be trying to help businesses' revenue streams. I'm quoted in the paper back in 07 and 08 saying that if businesses want businesses to succeed, then the businesses should invest in themselves. But for some reason, there was a vote put out in front of us that told us that, you know what, this chamber, which now is KPA, cannot do this, and it needed to be done by the town. Okay? I was against that. Now, years later, we're being told now, let's let the chamber or the KPA take it over again because they can do it better than the town. All I said back then was it's not going to work, and guess what? I guess this group is saying it's not working because they want to transfer the funds back to here and away from the town. Once the tax was put through, I said that the golf course was our biggest tourism thing and we had a golf course debt. And we should use the money for that. And then Mr. Rome came on board with that and ran on that premise. Once again, this organization came and started to argue that no, we are not to spend the money for that, which I find funny now that when I read the town handbook, everyone is actually agreeing that the golf courses are #1 tourism. As far as working to the business community, the town employees, and the residents to build a consensus of varied issues and ensure we grow the regional four-season economy, I don't understand the question of what issues. I mean, the issue seems to be that there's a grabbing for a certain amount of money that shouldn't be. The town should be doing its core functions. And if you want to grow in any town, your economy and economic development and tourism, the town should be supplying fire, police, safety, library, recreation, backing the schools, highway. And if we supply that as a town, then that should make it very feasible for businesses to come on board and move forward.
Okay, question 2. The KPAA would like to work with the town and the resort to grow the regional economy. This summer, the EDTC voted unanimously to pursue a plan that would repeal the sales and use portion of the options tax and the transfer marketing and events responsibility expense to the KPAA. The KPAA, with the support of the resort and our growing membership, would manage the marketing and special events. The KPAA would like to continue pursuing this plan in 2015 and will propose that the town subcontract all of the marketing events to the KPAA. Do you support the KPAA and its interest in managing marketing and special events for the town in 2015-16 and modifying the options tax at a future date?
The answer would be no. And this is really a tricky question here. The first part of the question is asking me if the KPA would, telling me that the KPA would like to work with the town and the resort to grow the regional economy. What I find funny about this question is that I thought the resort was one of the members of the KPAA. I mean, is there a problem between the two? Are they not agreeing with inside this one group? As far as, so when I look at it, the KPA would like to work with the town and the resort to grow their regional economy. I hope the resort and the KPA are working on that currently on their own, and that there is no.
Absolutely. The question is, because of the option tax is not going through, we would like to subcontract from the town.
Well,
so that's really the point.
But it is broken up into 2 paragraphs. So it's going on to say that the EDDC voted unanimously to pursue the plan that would repeal the sales and use option tax. I find this funny because this was my idea. Okay? So I brought this forward in an EDTC meeting. The only problem I have with it is that currently what it was saying was that there was $450,000 received from the sales option tax side of it, and there's only $250,000 that the town would see in decreases. I believe that we should continue to repeal the sales option tax side of this, and by releasing $450,000 worth of revenue from the town, that the town at the same time can find $450,000 worth of expenses that's going towards these functions. As far as the second part of the question, asking me at this time if I support cutting a check to the KPAA for the 2015-16 budget, to just cut a check to subcontract out these things to them, I don't understand how you can do that while we have a vote in front of us asking us to put a budget together which has specific line items in it for specific items. So either you vote yes on the budget or you vote no on the budget. I understand Howard put out, or I'm sorry, not it was signed by Howard, but your organization put out a letter saying please vote yes for the budget. I think we both want the budget to fail. Because there's no way, even if you want to move forward with your proposal, to have the town subcontract to this organization over $250,000, you can't have the budget passed. So no, I don't at this time of this year believe that we should be giving a check to this organization for $250,000 or even for any money at this time.
Question 3, as you stated, the KPAA supports the Select Board budget proposal for 2015-16. Obviously, you do not support their budget. Would you like to elaborate on why?
The presentation that I just gave you showed that the town is in a negative deficit of close to $1 million. The town is portraying to you in your handbook, or your town report as some call it, that it's a rosier picture than it is. This is the same thing we went through, folks, 7 years ago on a golf course. The golf course is doing great. The golf course is paying for itself. The golf course is this. It took 3 years for me of controversial and getting my butt handed to me that I was wrong. And now, we all of a sudden, guess what? I believe in one of the statements, Patty McGrath stated in the Mountain Times through the Select Board meeting that she's amazed at how all of a sudden in 5 years that our golf course debt has gone from $5.5 million to $3.4 million. You know why that happened, folks? It's because I pushed it.
And the last question, as you just alluded, over the last 3 years, the town and golf committee have worked to put the golf course on a path to be self-sustaining.
No, we got related over the last year, the town and Midmark, for some reason we jumped over a question here.
Which one?
Well, question 3 is 2 parts. Do you support their budget proposal? And then it says why, and I answered that. Then underneath question 3, it's saying related over the last year, the town events and marketing coordinator has worked 30 hours a week for the town and then served as the KPA director for 20 hours a week. Sharing employee has been critical for this organization. Do I support the continuation of this position at the funding level as outlined in the town's budget proposal? That's 2 questions, folks.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like the time to answer that question.
Feel free.
Okay, so in 2013, if you go back to your 2013 town report, you will see that we budgeted a salary for this position for a full year at $30,600. And that meant that person was solely working for the town of Killington. There was no idea that that person was going to come over here. So, as this states that all of a sudden now, and I believe it was in the Mountain Times, December 9th, stated that she was going to only work for 30 hours a week for the town. Well, if you look it up, she's still being paid $30,600. So her hours were cut 25%. And you're asking me if I would support the continuation of this position at the funding level. She took a 25% reduction in her hourly time, and she basically got a raise. And now when you look at the 2015 budget, they still use that original number, and she has a COLA increase in there. So now Mr. Horner is here to listen on planning. When I was on the board, we cut Mr. Horner's salary. We did cut his salary, basically because we cut his hours. You know, and I stood up for Mr. Horner and wanted to make sure that his insurance, whatever hours they wanted to cut him down, I agreed that there was supposed to be some hours cut. But whatever it was, to please make sure that this man did not lose his health insurance. And I don't think I could sit here and lie about that with Dick standing right here. I care about employees, but how do you think this makes other employees in our town feel when, do you folks, your businesses, do you cut someone's hours and keep them at the same rate? I don't think so. So I guess my answer for that is I don't support it.
And the last question, over the last 3 years, the town and golf committee have worked to put the golf course on a path to self-sustaining. During that period, the golf course has paid for its annual operational expenses, capital expenses, and provided $50,000 a year to the general fund to offset debt payments. Now that the golf course seems to be under control, what is your position on supporting new investments like mountain biking trails to ensure we remain competitive in the summer and fall tourism market?
I'll break it out to two questions in here also. I mean, it's sort of like a trick question here. Now that the golf expenses seem to be under control, seems a big word, folks. The golf course expenses aren't under control. What is my position on supporting new investments? If the golf course expenses were under control, I would support us moving forward. But when you go to, and these are once again, I have not been on the board for 2 years, go to the town book report, pull up the golf course book. There's a capital plan in place for the golf course. Go underneath the line item that calls irrigation system. My last 2 years on the board I was pushing for because I had heard from Kathleen Ramsey that there was stated that the irrigation system only had a certain life expectancy. Back then it was 10 years. So when we created this one group called the Golf Committee, they put together a capital plan. They also hired on a consultant to come in, and the consultant did a test on the irrigation system. It was said that the irrigation system would cost $1.2 million. You can look at the line item, folks. There's no money put aside for it. So the golf course is not in good shape. To say that it's paying itself and it's providing $50,000 a year towards a $603,000 payment this year, and if you listen to previous select board meetings, I believe they stated that they don't want to give that $50,000 to us anymore because their revenue decreased 6% this past year. If you look through the capital plan, you'll see that they only have $4,000 in reserves. And they're betting on that the golf revenues stay to what the previous 2 years were, not this year's past revenues. There's no way that this golf course is going to survive on its own on an operational basis because it cannot take care of its capital needs down the road. I'm not the only one that says this. I've had discussions with our auditor back when I was on it, and his basic words to me were like, you guys should get rid of the golf course. We worked with it to keep it and move it forward. Sometime we have to face the fact that we're going to need to borrow $1.2 million in the next decade for an irrigation system, unless we just want it to go to weeds and lose a $5.5 million investment. And at the same time, we were told in the rec department that the swimming pool needs to be replaced, which is another $1.2 million, which has less than 7 years left to it. And at the same time, we have a fire department that does need a new fire department. What type of fire department? I don't know. I'm not going to be the one that says it's $3 million, $5 million, $7 million, or whatever. That has to come in front of the board, and it has to go in front of the taxpayers for it. But this town is looking at some huge expenses.
Jim, I'd just like to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to, we do have limited time for questions, so I'd love to.
Okay, I'm done with that.
Okay. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Sir?
Jim, I have one question. Currently, I looked under the State of Vermont Department of Tourism and the Department of Rec to find top 10 summer attractions in Vermont. What activities are the top 10? Currently, they have golf 13th in one and 10th in another. The first 10, we have hiking. The rest of them we don't have. And in there are trails. Now, they're multi-use. They could be mountain biking. They could be a lot of different assets. And some of the strengths of these programs are you build it, and it doesn't have overhead. It doesn't have irrigation. It doesn't have all of those other issues. Having a golf course and the type of golf course that we have is an enormous asset, though expensive, as we've all found out over the years. I wonder what your position is on having land provided by the federal government or the state and us developing that land to suit public use and then having no overhead for that. Now, how that plays out, we don't know. We're applying for grants to inch this thing along, and maybe it takes a little while, but at some point in time may come a point where the town may have to make a commitment to that, and I was wondering what your position is, being that that is the #1 attraction here in the summer in the state of Vermont.
Phil, I wish you were around on the golf course, because I wasn't either, because then you could have came up with the, this data that's showing that maybe trails and hiking and bike riding, probably back then too, were in the top 10. Unfortunately, for some reason, we pushed for a golf course, which put us into a hole that we need to take care of at this point before we move on to other stuff. Okay? You talk about grants that might be possibly available in the future. We're still waiting 4 years later for grants for the continuation of the Route 4 streetscape. But in the current budget, if you look at it, we're not sure if we're going to get these grants, okay? And I understand that. And when they come up, then we'll have to discuss them. And it is cheap money. But for some reason, we're not paying attention this year in our budget for our old infrastructure that's going downhill. But yet, we're putting a certain dollar amount aside for hoping we get these grants. We don't know if we're getting the grants. Most towns, I believe, what they do is that they apply for grants. If they get the grant, they go to the voters, they ask the voters would vote on it. What I'm seeing in this budget here, folks, is by voting yes on the budget, you're voting yes for a certain dollar amount to be put aside for this, and then you will not even have a vote to decide if we go through with it or not. Phil, I own a business here. I don't belong to this organization, but I want this town to prosper just as much as everybody in this room, just as much as Chris Bianchi wants. But we need to do it in a financially responsible way. And we have to take care of our obligations, just like you need to do in your own business. We all would love to go out and put in some new seats and some new whatever, but you got to take care of the refrigeration first, okay? We'd love to put a new awning up, but you got to take care of the cooktop. You know, that's where we need to take care of our stuff. Do I think we never should be doing any of these things that you're saying, Phil? I'm not saying that at all. We may need 3, 4, or 5 years to get our butts back on track, get our financial stuff back in order, to take those next steps. And guess what? It's probably going to take 4 or 5 years for these grants to start showing up anyway, because you never get the grant the first time around. We've been doing this for a while, and we know that. Ed Fowler?
Jim, what you said in your presentation, we're using our restricted funds for cash flow and our property tax money for cash flow. When do you think that if we vote this budget in on March 3rd, when do you think we're going to be in need of borrowing more money for the short term?
First of all, I'm asking you not to vote the budget in.
Right.
So,
But we should be in a hole by July 1st, is that?
Ed, we're in a hole right now.
Okay.
I mean, go, can I have the town book?
Yeah?
Or can you go to the, I don't have the town book. I mean, everybody has a phone with a calculator on it, right? Page 8, Town Treasurer's Report. Beginning balance January, I'm sorry, hold on one second here. The balance December 31st, 2014. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth line item with the big bold line underneath it. $4,522,213.80 sitting in cash. Now you have to recognize that underneath that there is a $972,345.67 of that is a balance that's supposed to be in restricted funds. Then you have right underneath that there's $4,461,152.02 due to the state of Vermont on June 1st, 2015. So in my presentation, Ed, I showed you this slide. I showed you when you take 4,522,213.80 and you subtract 4,461,152.02, there's some balance of $61,000 left of cash. And then I show you that we're supposed to have another $972,000. So by those calculations alone right there, the town had a negative cash balance of $901,000. Now, since you're asking me this question, and some of us have the book in front of us, on page 8, it starts telling us what restricted funds are available, what's supposed to be in restricted funds. I would love to know why or how fund number 143, how do you have a negative balance in a restricted fund? It's a $38,577.33 negative balance. Now let's jump down 3 more to the library capital, 146 of a negative $2,627.47. There's over 41,000 of negative balances in there. So when you read on page 9, one might think that we have $972,345 set aside to take care of all these obligations. I'm telling you we don't have it, and I'm telling you that that's short by $40,000.
Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot for your time, folks.
Thank you.
It's all about the numbers.
We'll take a brief intermission, and then we'll have Chris Miyake come up and take his positions. You're ready.
Okay, I won't even need 10 minutes. So, first, I just want to thank you all for having me here, inviting me to come and talk. I want to start out by reminding everybody that this position is a volunteer position. Before I was here, I was cramming to finish work because I've been spending so much time doing this. Just like the rest of you that volunteer for the chamber, this is a volunteer position. I've been serving on the board for 6 years. In that time, I've served with 6 different board members and 2 different town managers. Not too many of our select board members have that type of experience in the history of the town, actually. In that time, I think I've demonstrated to you and the town who I represent, how well I work with people. There's been some tough challenges over the years. So I think, in my mind, I'm a clear choice for this election. I think I'm a proven choice for this election. I want to keep my comments short so that we can get into your questions. But what I wanted to ask you to think about is, in the past 6 years, whose interests have I represented in my position, and whose interests has my opponent represented in this position? He has a lot of claims, and I'd be happy to discuss any of those with you. I'm not about negative advertising. I know that being on a board means that we can't accomplish anything unless we work together. I don't think my opponent believes that. And he takes credit for a lot of accomplishments that the board has to do as a whole. And I think that's a key difference that sets us apart.
So you were provided with 4 questions in advance. I'll just read them quickly, and then you'll have a chance to answer each one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. The first question, how will you work with the business community, the town employees, and the residents to build consensus on a variety of issues and ensure we grow the regional 4-season economy? Why are you well-suited and qualified for the aspects of this job as selectman?
Okay. Well, I think in my opening statement, I think I've answered that, but in the, if you saw my letter to the editor and the questions in the paper, I think I understand what it means to build consensus and how you work together as a board. You know, listening, gathering together the key stakeholders, and understanding their issues and concerns, and then you have to be willing to compromise. Again, I think I've proven that I've been willing to do that. I'll save that for later. I was going to read something that I read at a select board meeting at the beginning of the year, but it actually applies to a different question, even better than that question. So I'll say that.
All right. Secondly, the KPAA would like to work with the town and the resort to grow the regional economy. This summer, the EDTC voted unanimously to pursue a plan that would repeal the sales and use portion of the options tax and transfer the marketing and events responsibility and expense to the KPAA. The KPAA, with the support of the resort and our growing membership, would manage the marketing and special events. The KPAA would like to continue pursuing this plan in 2015 and will propose that the town subcontract all the marketing and events activities to the KPAA. Do you support the KPAA and its interest in managing the marketing and special events for the town in 2015 and 16 and modifying the options tax at a future date?
The short answer to that is yes. All of the above. In fact, I believe the suggestion to outsource the events came out of a discussion that I was having with our town manager. And so I think that brainchild came right from our discussions. And this is where, when I started my second term, I read this statement at the second meeting of my term at the select board meeting, and I said, earlier this year, a group of us got together to brainstorm on ways Killington could improve on what was started in 2008, the EDT. But much of our discussion focused on the questions of what destination marketing and economic development are, why are they important, and what are the roles of the public-private sector in each. I'll skip ahead. We identified some key issues and elements for success. First, we all agree that the on-mountain experience is just one amenity and the visitors are looking for a total destination experience. So these are my words from 3 years ago that shows that I think the town needs to work with all the businesses in town, not just the resort. We can't rely only on the resort. We can't only rely on the village. We need to create a complete destination experience. We all recognize that our current infrastructure and offerings are limited when compared to other mountain resorts. And some type of organization, we call it a destination marketing organization, KPAA, and solid economic development policy are key elements to our economy and necessary for us to compete with our mountain destinations. This was 3 years ago. Further, any proposed plan for change has to be comprehensive and not rushed. That's why it was 3 years ago. Has to be sustainable, so we want to be sure it works. Has to have input from and support from various community constituents, and lastly, must consider the golf course debt and propose ways to alleviate that burden on the property taxpayer. This was the plan that we started over 3 years ago. Actually started in December of 2011, and the plan that the KPAA and the resort have put forward is the result of all this work and years of effort. And I think we've accomplished all of the goals that we set out in putting together that plan. So I think it's obvious why I support question 2. I've been working on it since I've been on the board, really.
Question 3, the KPAA supports the select board budget proposal for 2015 and 16. Do you support their proposal and why?
Yes, I do support the proposal. Well, one, because I helped develop that proposal. We worked on it for 5 months. I think we worked hard to control expenses and keep taxes as low as possible. We're doing a lot to plan for the future. We've really put a lot of effort into developing tools that our employees need, such as our capital plans, to really think ahead and make sure that we're taking care of those the town's obligations. What it allows us to do is have much better insight into what's coming in the future so that we can keep the tax rate steady and we don't have to have any large fluctuations because some big unexpected repair or project.
And related question to that, over the last year, the town events and marketing coordinator has worked 30 hours a week for the town and then served as the KPAA director for 20 hours a week. Sharing an employee has been critical to us. To support the continuation of this position and the funding level as outlined in the town's budget proposal.
Most definitely. I think One of the ways that we're going to compete against our competitors, and when I say our competitors, it's other mountain resort destinations, is by sharing resources and making these public-private partnerships. The park and ride here is a perfect result. One that people don't even know is the resort and the town share plowing of the Killington Road. That means that they have something to do with their town plow trucks or their plow trucks. When they're finished, you know, they have to have all these assets. They have a way to use them. We don't have to have more staff and more trucks. Sharing of the director has been a great benefit to both organizations, and really has helped kind of meld both organizations into being much more efficient and successful.
And the last question. Over the last 3 years, the town and golf committee have worked to put the golf course on a path to be self-sustaining. During that period, the golf course has paid its annual operational expenses, capital expenses, and provided $50,000 a year to the general fund to offset debt payments. Now that the golf course seems to be under control, what is your position on supporting new investments like mountain biking and trails to ensure we remain competitive in the summer and fall tourism market?
Again, with full support, and I think if you've been coming to the meetings or watching the meetings, I think I've demonstrated that as well. We can't just only, to take a quote from the paper yesterday, we can't only take care of our current responsibilities without thinking about the future. We can't just keep waiting to start thinking about the future. You have to do both at the same time, and I think we are taking care of our current responsibilities as we need to. But one of the things that our administration, select board, and the town manager, one of the things that we've been excellent at has been going after grant opportunities and planning grants and doing exactly that, thinking about the future. The streetscape study, we have a much better idea of what we would like this area to look like. The Killington Road study. We're applying for grants right now for the mountain bike trails, working with the U.S. Forest Service. For as long as we've been in this town, all of us together, we've had, I don't know how many acres it is, acres and acres of land that's U.S. Forest Service land designated for recreational use, and it's been untapped. And somebody finally called up the U.S. Forest Service and said, let's see if we can use that land to benefit our economy. It's designated for recreational use. We're a recreational tourism economy. Why not use it? And I think that, you know, is just a perfect example.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up the floor to questions now. Vito?
Chris, on question 2, you said you agree with funding the KPAA as well as sunsetting the sales and use portion of the options tax. That doesn't seem to work in an immediate basis. You can't do both at the same time. Could you flesh out what you would see happening down the road and how to manage the elimination of that tax as well as funding the KPAA? And number 2, I just have a 2-part question. Your opponent sat there and said the town is running on a deficit. Could you explain how you guys are managing that deficit and how it will be managed on a going forward basis?
Okay. Well, first, I think the town outsourcing the current events that it's doing would remove those expenses from the town budget, and they would be outsourced to run here. I think that's a transitional move until we can actually sunset the tax and the KPA can take over those events completely. I think, so that's how that transition works. But obviously the town wouldn't continue to fund the KPAA at that same dollar value after the tax was removed. But I think that it makes more sense for this organization to manage those events than it does for the town to do that. Why? We do the same thing with other individual events. Why not just do it for more events? You know, we'll pay the Killington Classic a certain amount of money to manage and run the Killington Classic. We'll pay the stage race a certain amount of money. And why not just do on an umbrella basis for managing that part of it also. You know, the administration of getting and managing those events. Second part of the question is, the deficit that we're running is mostly because we haven't reconciled the Irene storm account yet, because we're still waiting for FEMA funds to come in, and we don't know how much that deficit's actually going to be. So we've been carrying alongside the general fund this FEMA account that's, according to our auditors, about $800,000 plus in a deficit right now. We've done all the repairs because that's very important to our economy and our town to get these repairs done. And then the way FEMA works is we have to go after the money after the fact. So we have to pay the money out before we get the money back. We've been very aggressive and actually better than most towns, I would say, at the amount of money that we have received from FEMA and the state, because we did such a good job at our documentation and our going through the process, all the red tape and the paperwork, just enormous. Once we've finally received the last check that we know we're going to get from FEMA, we will have to develop a plan to slowly reduce that deficit and roll it back into the general fund. But there was no other way to do it. We had to repair the roads. The only other option would be to raise taxes to pay for all those repairs, and then lower taxes in future years when we got the FEMA money. The state lets us do what we're doing. We are, to quote our auditors, we are following generally accepted accounting principles. We're doing it right. We're audited by professional auditors every year. We are trying to do everything by the book. I know my opponent says we're not, and I know he claims that, I love the quote in the paper, I'm good with numbers and they're not. But I don't think that, I don't personally believe his claims. You have to make your own decisions.
Any other questions? Mr. Fowler?
On the same line here, I think you said we're running a deficit. Have we set up restricted funds for various projects we want to do, and the taxes I paid in November haven't been, has that been spent? Are we going to run to a point where June or July we're going to be out of money and we're going to have to go borrow $2 or $3 million?
Every town in the state of Vermont that runs on a January to December fiscal year borrows money from the bank to pay their town expenses until they get their tax dollars in July and June. It's just, you don't even vote the budget until March, and you don't get your first tax payment until the state sets the tax rate on July 1st.
But the restricted funds, are they being used for cash flow?
Restricted funds are always used for cash flow. We've always done it this way. Dave Lewis used to invest money when he was here and make $140,000 on those restricted fund dollars, the state's restricted funds. All towns use their restricted fund balances to pay for bills because they're not, it reduces the amount of interest we have to pay the bank. Because tax income is a guaranteed income unless your entire town goes bankrupt. If someone doesn't pay their taxes, you eventually put their house up for tax sale. It's unfortunate, but it's guaranteed income. If I have a bill tomorrow for $50 and I only have $100 in the bank and I have $100 in restricted funds, I still pay the bank, pay that bill $50 tomorrow because I know I'm going to be getting $200 the next day. That's just the way towns operate in Vermont. It's the way they all operate. So the restricted funds, the Treasurer's Handbook, it all tells you restricted funds are not actually in a separate bank account. It's all in the same account. It's all part of the same cash flow pot. It's just accounted for separately in the books. We promised to keep that money and make sure it's available when we need it. But we might not need that money in that restricted fund for 10 years. We're saving for, in the golf course, for a balloon payment that is now, what is it, 8 years out? We're saving in the golf course for a replacement and repair of our irrigation system. That might be 20 years out, but we're putting money aside for that. But it's in the same account. It's all part of our cash flow.
Any other questions?
I hate to contradict you, and maybe I'm getting bad information off the websites, especially in regards to reserve/restricted funds. I mean, I looked up the treasurer's handbook, and maybe it's because it's dated, but it's stated in the handbook, the treasurer's handbook, that reserve/restricted funds are supposed to be kept in a separate account according to statute. Now, how does that square with what you say?
Well, first of all, I'm not the treasurer. The treasurer hasn't advised us to do that. I just spoke to the treasurer 10 minutes ago. I know our treasurer is new, but she spoke to many other treasurers about the same question because she was concerned and got the same answer. No towns put restricted funds in a separate account. It's all in the general fund. The account that they're talking about is in the accounting software on paper. It's not actually in a separate bank account.
Okay, that's the distinction.
I think that's the distinction. But look, when the big 2-page paid ad came out in the paper yesterday saying we were doing it wrong, I went right to start doing the research to find out what's he talking about again. It's the same question we had that, if you remember last town meeting, Charlie Demarest and Billy Bauer brought it up. Stood there right after that meeting. We immediately called our auditors up. They came to a meeting on May 7th, I think, last year. We hashed it out for hours down in the town hall. Even Jim himself said, okay, I understand the answer now, and supported the answer that the auditors gave us. But now we're back adding 4 numbers again and coming up with a number that saying we're doing something wrong.
Okay, if you want to have a follow-up question.
Jim, for 40 years in the town report,
Jim or Chris?
we published the teachers' salaries, and in the last few years, we go to vote on the school budget as well as the municipal budget. We don't see any teacher salaries or benefits. Individually. Our town employees, we see them, but we don't see the town employees who work for the school.
I'm not the school board, unfortunately, and I don't have control over the report that the school board gives us. That I would love you to show up at the school board meeting tomorrow and say that. But we have
somehow in the last few years they've eliminated that. It's been taken away.
It's not a requirement for us to show the town employees. Most towns don't do it. It's not a requirement for them to show it. It's up to the school board at the time whether they want to do it. But there are more people. We just had a education finance forum Tuesday night where we had the League of Cities and Towns. We had a very distinguished panel. We had Campaign for Vermont. People traveled from hours away, and we had maybe 15 people show up in the room. I don't fault our town for not being interested. I fault the state for creating an education tax system that's so complicated that removes any decision-making from the voters so much that we've all kind of lost hope that we can make any kind of change in it at all, so when no one's interested. And I think that's exactly what they want. The people who put forth Act 60 and 68, they want us to be removed and not have any kind of influence anymore, and they're succeeding. But the only way we're going to change that, last year there were 42 or 62 school budgets voted down, 42 I think in the state voted down. I think our school does a great job, but I was surprised that there wasn't one question before the vote on the school budget.
Phil, I believe you had a question?
I have one question on the grand list, Chris. You and I got a document from the town. It was an Excel spreadsheet, and it documented every sale of property in Killington, commercial, residential, for the last 4 years, or since the townwide reappraisal. There's a little block in 2012 where there's no information, nobody knows why, but that's missing.
So I got that too.
We computed those numbers. They gave me an Excel spreadsheet. I wasn't able to create a column. It did everything but measure what that sales number was against the grand list, which was very odd that we excluded the most important number. So Chris added that column, and it came up with numbers that are staggering. It's in the 20 to 30% overvaluation. Commercial properties, 226% in 4 years. Residential properties were somewhere around 28 to 32%, depending on how you looked at it, and that's excluding everything that Butch deemed as not an arm's length transaction. Now, I could buy Ed's car out in the parking lot, and Butch would think that wasn't an arm's length transaction, so we still left those alone. If you add those in, those numbers are even worse. My question to you is, what do you think our property values are what we're being assessed? And if the answer is no, how do we go about bringing that in line in the next couple of years? Because we're eligible for a townwide reappraisal. Woodstock just did theirs, and they had done their reappraisal the same year as us. And their selectmen decided to say, listen, these values are out of whack. They have an anomaly on high-end homes that are selling above, but all of their middle and lower income homes, and Woodstock lower income is 300, so I'm not saying they're low, but they decided to go forward with that. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Right, well, it's a good question. So Phil did approach me a while ago about this issue in town, and so we have two systems. When someone buys a property in town, they have to go down to the town office, or their lawyers do, and they fill out a property transfer report that goes to the state. And they fill that out with the town clerk, and they pay a property transfer tax on that report. That determines their property transfer tax. It's usually one document of so many that people probably don't even realize it's done. The lawyers probably take care of it. But what Lucretia has been doing with that, and this has just been on her own as town clerk, it's not a requirement of the state, is she's been tracking all those property transfer tax or property transfer forms in a spreadsheet. So she has the listed value, the assessed value at the time, and the sale value at the time. When you look at Lucretia's numbers, what Phil was looking at and what brought to my attention, and I spent hours looking at, Phil's right. We come up with this large discrepancy in the assessed value being much higher than the sale value in a lot of cases. This kind of set off some red flags, so I had to investigate further. The state does that same thing in a large database for the whole state, and they come out every year with the equalization study, they call it, and that determines what our CLA value is, if you know. The CLA value, where the discrepancy is between what Phil and I were finding and the state's finding. What happened right away, Lucretia's numbers don't reflect tax appeals or grievances. They're the number at the time of the sale. The new owner comes in and says the next year, hey, I bought it for this and it was assessed for that, I shouldn't have to pay that much, and they get an appraisal, and if everything looks good, the BCA or the listers lower the value in the grand list to whatever the grievance said or the BCA said. The state gets all those updated numbers, but Lucretia's spreadsheet doesn't have those updated numbers because she's just doing this voluntarily to kind of have track for herself. That's where the discrepancy is. So what's happening is, as sales happen, those are being changed because people are grieving their taxes, and those are what state's using. But if we've all been here for 20 years, we don't sell our homes, our values aren't being changed unless we go get an appraisal and grieve our taxes also. The state uses two numbers, the CLA, and they call it a coefficient of dispersion. The coefficient of dispersion is a measure of how different assessed to sale ratios are from one house to the next. So if my house is assessed at $100,000 and the sale value, or the sale value is $120,000, then my CLA is around 80%, or my sale to assessed value is around 80% something. Somebody else's might be 130%. So there's a big discrepancy between mine and someone else's. When that coefficient dispersion number gets to 20, that's the magic number, that triggers a forced reappraisal by the state. We're at 16 right now. And I sat for a half hour with Butch in the car one day when we were waiting for the bus on a snowy day and the bus was late. And I said, Butch, it's time to start thinking about a reappraisal again. I know our CLA looks great, and when you see 101%, you think, wow, we're doing a really great job. But when you look at the coefficient dispersion number, it's telling a different story. And, you know, Phil and I are not off the mark. The work we did really highlights an issue. I think Butch agreed, but it's up to the listers to trigger the reappraisal. Back in 2008, when I was elected the first time, we were in the same problem. Our CLA was below 80%, and when your CLA gets below 80%, that triggers another mandated reappraisal by the state. There's a whole process that the listers go through. They can challenge the CLA. And back in 2007 and in 2008, our listers, Pat Whalen at the time, challenged the CLA with the state. And the state somehow dropped the ball and never got back to them. So they said, we don't have to do anything. But the state was sending them letters saying, mandating a reappraisal, and our listers were ignoring it. They just were ignoring it. And when I was first elected, one of the first things I did, and again, this is a claim in the paper to my opponent that he's taking credit for, but I found out from Kathleen when our state rep was going to be there meeting with our listers to try to resolve this issue, and I went down there. I mediated for 3 hours in the basement of the town hall and told Pat Whalen he can't talk to people like the way he was talking to the state rep. And finally just said to the state rep, what do we need to do? Why is this process so complicated? And he said, well, there's a planning document you have to provide to the state of how you're planning to do your reappraisal. And I said, get me the document, I'll do it for our listers. And that really, all honestly, I was there, boots on the ground. That's what triggered finally got our reappraisal rolling and got our lister out of office and got a new lister in office. So he can take credit for suing the town, which a lot of people do over his taxes, but that's not what triggers a reappraisal.
All right, we're almost at the end of this. Do we have time for one final question? Does anybody have any more questions?
I got something quick. Well, just generally for the 1%, which has been bugging me for a while. Most towns that I know of that have put a 1% in is for infrastructure. Now, do you support anything down the road with possibly moving the 1% into a vote to change that so we can direct those funds for infrastructure along? Whether it be businesses from the smallest one in town, which is me, to the largest one, obviously, up the road. All the businesses chip in a percentage, a fair percentage, into advertising and marketing. Events, selling whatever we sell, including new people coming in so I can mow their lawn. But everybody's selling whatever we sell, and that would be the fund for marketing and making the town grow, rather than that 1%, which I believe should be totally for infrastructure. Roads, fire, police, DPW, EMS, everything infrastructure only. And that kind of money putting into a pot for infrastructure would put our infrastructure of a world-class resort to a world-class town down the road. That's my comment on it.
Okay, so in a way, I think the plan being proposed by the KPAA, the resort, the select board, to repeal the sales and use part of the 1% does exactly that. Because what you're talking about, roads, police, public safety, our infrastructure makes up the majority of our budget anyway. So you can just rationalize or assume that every dollar we get from the 1% from rooms and meals is covering the infrastructure part of our budget. It's not additional money. It all goes into the general fund, and it's being used to cover infrastructure, if that's where you want to say. We essentially have two sources of income, which major sources of income. We have property tax and we have non-property tax, and the 1% is a non-property tax. There are other fees and small things, but I'm not really looking at those. The sales and use portion, though, of the 1%, in my mind, is a very inefficient tax. And I understand, and I've listened to the resort and their reasoning for why they want to propose this, and I believe it, and I support it. Other towns that have put this in, that are resort towns, haven't put in the sales and use portion, or very few of them have. I haven't looked at it in 2 years, which towns are doing it now. I understand, and I've read the statute, that the reason the legislature allowed this tax in the first place, because not all towns are even allowed to have it, only the ones that were adversely affected by Act 68 are allowed to have this tax. The reason why they put it in was to help reduce property tax on residents like us and reduce dislocations. It actually says reduce dislocations in the statute. But the statutes leave it open-ended, so our town voted it in for a different purpose. And when we voted for it, we believed it was for a different purpose. We're allowed to change our minds also, and we changed our mind. That's, you know, a prerogative of the voters. They did. So now we're where we're at now. And so I do support repealing the sales and use portion because I think it does put our major business at a disadvantage compared to other resort towns, and we all want to succeed together. It's inefficient, so when one business is paying the majority of that sales and use tax, and a third of that is going to Montpelier to get distributed and go to infrastructure in other towns and help support other towns around the state, I think that's just wrong. I think we do our fair share of paying taxes to the state. And so the statement I read in the beginning was all about finding a better way to do it. And I didn't read the part earlier in the statement that said, but the way we fund economic development is inefficient, ultimately robbing the town of $300,000 a year, because that's town. So if in your model, all of the businesses collectively, voluntarily gave 1% to an organization, we would have more money to do sales and marketing than we do now. But there's no legal way to really manage that. There's no legal way to know what 1% of someone's business is. I mean, it's very difficult to do. The Stowe Area Association doesn't have any kind of fee on retail sales. They get it all from lodging. It's a percentage on lodging. And the consumer pays it right through the lodging bureau when they sign up. If you look at the list of taxes when you go reserve a room up there. So we're moving to a more generally accepted model around, or the proposal is a more generally accepted and working model around the country. This is not rocket science. No one's trying to reinvent anything here. We're just trying to do it, use best practices.
All right, well,
Does that answer your question?
thank you very much. Oh,
I just want to clarify one little thing about this 1% tax. Just so people understand fully who is paying the 1% sales and use tax. We've had this discussion in select board meetings with representatives of the resort there, and I posed the question, how much money does the resort actually pay in sales and use tax on things that they consume? The answer was $80,000, not $500,000. A majority of the tax, sales and use tax, is paid by the patrons of the mountain on the lift tickets. So just so there's no confusion about who actually pays that 1%, it's the consumers, not the mountain. The mountain maintains that somehow this tax that the consumer pays goes right to their bottom line. They try to characterize it as not a pass-through tax. It is a pass-through tax, just so everybody's clear on it.
Okay.
I'd just like
You know,
to say,
it's an ongoing debate, but the resort disagrees. And
I don't care if the resort disagrees.
Vito.
Common sense tells you this is the way it is.
Vito, no.
It's a sales tax.
Vito, I understand what you're saying, but what you're not understanding is retail philosophy and the consumer. And you're not understanding price elasticity models.
Yes, I do understand price elasticity.
You're not, well,
A 1% difference in the lift ticket, it doesn't even amount to $1.
it's about $1 because the lift ticket's $84.
Yeah, but it also, they also sell discount tickets all over the place. I just saw an ad for $49 for a Killington lift ticket. That's less than 50 cents.
The resort.
I understand price elasticity. I was an economics major.
Okay.
I know all about price elasticity.
You know, I think you're getting.
yeah, this is
You're not allowing me.
yeah.
You
Well,
made a
you're trying
statement.
to characterize something as not being a pass-through tax when in fact it is.
What I
Chris,
said.
thank you for coming.
Yeah, all right.
Everybody, thanks for
This
coming.
is not meant to be a debate. If you have a question, that's fine.
You can debate it with the resort all you
It's
want.
not a debate. It's fact.
Does the price say tax included or tax additional? Price says tax included for a lift ticket.
So what? That's just
No, that's included in the total tax. That's what